Hi, this is Conversations with Sebastian Galliani, episode 66. Our guest today is Natalia Lamberova. Natalia is a Russian economist and political scientist. She received a PhD in government from UCLA. Currently, Natalia is assistant professor at the School of Economics, Political and Policy Science at UT Dallas. With her, we will talk about the recent military events in Russia and what they mean for the future of the invasion to Ukraine and for Putin's future. Hi, Natalia, how are you?
Hi, Sebastian. I'm good.
All right. Thank you for talking to me today. We're very interested in what happened in Russia since last weekend. So it seems that it initiated as a mutiny within the armed force, progressing to what appears to be a mafia gathering, briefly seems to evolve into a coup, but ultimately conclude abruptly, or at least in terms of the episode, akin to the conclusion of a hostage situation, with the terrorists granted safe passage, immunity from prosecutions, and a series of pledges. Could you help us in understanding this sequence of events better?
Well, I don't think that there is a person who understands what's happening fully. But we can gather some information from investigative journalists and other sources to try to look at the situation. So what happened is the head of the Russian mercenary group Wagner, called Prigozhin, started criticizing Putin pretty harshly, and not just Putin, but also the head of Russian military operations and defense minister. So undermining the authority. At some point, Russian political elites decided that it would be better to subsume all paramilitary groups into the Russian army. And Prigozhin was told that he would need to surrender his group and his weapon to Russian regular army by July 1st. Prigozhin, he is not just the leader of this mercenary group, he is also the owner of the infamous troll factory. He has huge assets in Russia and Syria, so he has a lot of a chunk of independent income and influence. But now he was losing this mercenary group. So at some point, while Wagner Group was supposedly preparing to transfer their arms to Russian army, they reported that they were attacked by Russian regular forces. Their camp was attacked. Most of investigative journalists say that it was just a staged situation to have a pretense to march in Moscow. And Prigozhin said that we are starting this march of justice to Moscow. Interestingly, on their way, on the ground, they did not force any opposition, so they did progress almost to Moscow, like 200 kilometers from Moscow. But despite the fact that nobody attempted to stop them on the ground, Russian aviation actually did. So under Voronezh, there was a raid on Wagner Group, and Wagner managed to strike down several helicopters and planes, military planes. Then pilots, or 10 people in the aviation were killed. But at this point, probably Prigozhin realized that Russia would still engage aviation, even if it is within, Russian territory, even if is a probability of Russian civilian casualties inside the country. So probably at this point, he realized that he does not indeed have enough support to proceed. And then the negotiations started, officially organized by Lukashenko.
Mm-hmm.
And we learned that all the charges against Prigozhin were dropped. All the Wagner mercenaries who did not participate in the coup can continue serve in Russian army. Those who did participate in the coup are expected to relocate to Belarus. And I actually had information from several people close to, like, investigative journalists and people who have contacts on the ground, that amazingly, Prigozhin managed to celebrate his wife's birthday in St. Petersburg a couple days after the mutiny. So he has free passage between the countries.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it actually raises more questions.
Yeah, let me raise one at least. Yeah. So what was the motivation behind Prigozhin mutiny?
So there are two camps of people with different opinion. I don't know which is true. We don't have enough data, but I will just describe you both. Mm-hmm. The first one, and the most heavily cited, is that Prigozhin felt that if he loses Wagner, he will lose a bunch of his influence. And this is what also there was the idea that he was failing to take Bakhmut as fast as he promised to. Mm-hmm. So he needed to shift the blame to somebody. Mm-hmm. And in the process of shifting blame, he probably over-criticized the system. And they started to think that him being ahead of Wagner is more of a liability. So they wanted to subsume Wagner into Russian army. Mm-hmm. So just maybe trying to regain the influence and power.
Okay. But just, yeah, 1 second. But so then essentially there was a threat on him, right? And it seems that he responded to that.
That is one view. Yeah. Yes, that is one view. Another view is that because his initial criticism was against incompetent leaders that were not providing enough ammunition to the army, were probably stealing from the army. So maybe that was the flip side of this constant competence-loyalty trade-off that Putin makes in favor of loyalty. So he has spent more than 20 years in power in Russia. And there's a paper by Konstantin Sonin, The Dictators and the Viziers. And I think that it has been describing Russian reality for many years, mm-hmm. Which states that the dictator needs to make a choice whether to, engage the competent minister or like a vizier in a paper. Mm-hmm. And this person would be efficient carrying out the war or fostering economic growth, or the person with less talent but who is loyal. And Putin always chose the competent one, because the loyal one, because the competent one is more likely to upstage Putin and to take the power for themselves. Mm-hmm. So this was carrying out for more than 20 years, and it did result really in less than competent leaders. And I think that people on the front line, they carry the cost of this incompetence. So official statements from Prigozhin initially during the criticism stage were take down Shoigu, take down Gerasimov, like change those incompetent viziers, replace them with competent commanders. But Putin can't do that. His whole power and his whole like political support hinges on the fact that loyal viziers know that he will protect them. So this is another point of view.
Okay.
And finally, there is a different point of view saying that it was actually all hoax by Kremlin, that it was all staged in order to facilitate the transfer of Russian armed forces to Belarus. And actually, like, part of Wagner is in Belarus. Ahmad now is in Belarus. So there are like Russian groups currently in Belarus. So that part is true. And looking at this whole process, one thing that puzzles me the most is, if you think about like game theory of coercion, you know that if one side wants the other to stop doing something, they need two tools. First, to credibly commit that they are able to punish the perpetrator. And the second, the ability to credibly commit that they will not punish the perpetrator if they comply. So obviously, like under Voronezh, I think Kremlin was able to show that they can punish Wagner Group. But the second part, that stating that they will not punish Prigozhin and Wagner Group after the fact, when they give up their arms, I don't know. I think it's lacking, because like, how can Putin commit not to punish Prigozhin?
But if it was a stage, it was a stage by Putin, right?
Well, this is one version, yes.
Okay, so let's leave that aside and let's get back to that towards the end, because if that's the case, many of the things that we are reading and discussing here in the West may not make much sense. So let's
that is true.
Let's stay with maybe it's possible, but let's just leave it behind the conversation for a while, and we can get back to that towards the end. Okay. So related is in terms of understanding, I think it's important to know how relevant is the Wagner Group to the Russian effort in Ukraine, especially now that the counteroffensive is going well, really.
That is a great question. So Wagner Group is really well trained. They're probably the most competent fighters Russia has. That's especially in a huge contrast with untrained subscripts, many of whom, like most of whom, don't want to be there and don't want to fight this war. So they are really efficient. But I think that Russian command saw that, like, after the events in Bakhmut, Russian regular army could, still keep control of Bakhmut even without Wagner. And maybe that gave them the idea that Wagner is not indispensable. But they are the best trained people there.
Okay. But so if they're not that important, that also diminishes a bit the role of the stage that we were discussing before, right? So I like to think that they were important, and that's part of the reason why things ended as they ended. Related to this, and you can answer this too, you already mentioned the critical role of the dictator Lukashenko in ending the 36-hour episode we discussed at the beginning, right? Now, Prigozhin was, he attacked Putin and others, but was mostly focused on the Minister of Defense, right? Either because he was threat, or because it was an excuse for he himself not delivering what he was expected to deliver. But in the end, although Putin's authority was questioned, in the very, very short run, the the authority of the minister is the one that was mostly put in question. What is the situation? What do you think Putin's gonna do with the situation of Shoigu?
So that is a great question. We don't know during the mutiny and a couple of days after, Shoigu was nowhere to be seen. But now in some events, he did appear at least at one public event. My guess that maybe with time, not immediately, maybe Putin will have to let him go. But that is very problematic for Putin because, again, his whole power hinges on the loyal ministers around him. And that will give a very dangerous signal to the rest of them.
Right. And again, right, all these things that we keep discussing and we keep giving a high probability or certain positive probability undermine the argument that it was all staged by Putin, right? Because he will not have put himself into this situation of having to be not loyal with the Minister of Defense and undermining the stability of his government.
That is true, but I think there were in that scenario, he could have gotten two significant fringe benefits. First, arms group in Belarus, and second, he saw which generals did not oppose Prigozhin.
But why Putin could have not just moved part of the army to Belarus without... He moved nuclear arsenal there already.
That is true. So I think that the versions that Prigozhin was threatened by a merger of Wagner into a regular army is more plausible. I'm just giving you all the versions.
That's fine. That's fine. But in any event, I think the arguing about this argument help us understand them better.
Yeah, that's true.
What will the Russian people make of all this, right? They basically, let me put it this way, they witnessed someone other than Putin engaging in political actions, and I will say more significantly, exerting force, right? Can this, well, let me put it this way. This certainly is something not that novel in Russia, and it may really affect the perception of the population about the government. So probably Putin will try to manipulate those perceptions, and so the question is he preparing for an intensified crackdown on information?
It's a great question. He was already engaging in very intensive crackdown on information since the start of the war, and he was heavily censoring everything even before that. So intensifying that even further. People still get real jail terms for posts on social media, for multiple years. It's already very intense. But the interesting part is that, as you've said, Russian people saw that Putin was not able to prevent that. And Prigozhin army moved to 120 miles to the border of Moscow. It was really close, without a single shot, very quickly. There were no serious opposition, both in the population and in the military. And people saw that. People saw that there were no people ready to stand up and go to the streets defending Putin's power. And I think that is a very important indicator of, real Putin's popularity in a society. Interestingly, like after the coup, Putin was having those small public appearances. In the first one, he said that the country showed incredible unity. In the second, he thanked the army and the military in stifling the coup. There were no observable efforts to do that, really.
Mm-hmm.
Both of those addresses were advertised ahead of time as, major events, something life-changing. Both of them were nothing, lasting for 3 minutes. And since the coup, Putin keeps appearing in all sorts of, public activities, visiting like innovation centers, drawing something on flip charts. So he has been appearing on the TV in a proportion that we have not seen for years.
Mm-hmm.
Probably like boosting his popular appeal, or at least trying to. Official reporting says that there was no impact on Putin's popularity. But again, this is the reporting of data on public opinion in a non-democracy. So like it is like controlled.
Yeah.
At the same time, investigative journalists said that in meetings of regional leaders with Kremlin told regional centers that by their information, Putin lost around 14 percentage points in popularity.
Starting from what base?
Starting from pre-coup. We were not given the benchmark of what Kremlin sees. We only see the official reports. Okay. So the change is 15% down, 14% down, and he boosted his public presence by a lot. But I think that the Prigozhin Mutiny really did make a huge blow into Putin's ability to control the society, because everyone saw that the situation with Wagner he was not able to control.
Right.
And additionally, the fact that it was diffused by Lukashenko and not by Putin is not ideal, because Belarus is a different country. And a huge part of Putin's agenda is discussion of Russian sovereignty. That Russia can manage Russian destiny. So the foreign leader interfering is not ideal for Putin's image.
Right. Although Lukashenko is seen as a puppet of Putin, right?
Well, Putin did not diffuse it himself. I think he would have looked stronger if he did it himself.
Okay. So I will say I was watching the scenes over the weekend, and one of the most intriguing scenes was Prigozhin's troops departing from Rostov, because people was applauding them and thanking them. So for what?
I suspect that because of Prigozhin's criticism of the war and his rhetoric saying that this war only benefits the elites and weakens Russia, people might have seen his coup as an attempt to stop the war.
Right. So how high is the support of the war among the general population in Russia?
Again, we don't have reliable data. We know that immigration from Russia at the start of the war was record high. We know that it was especially high among young men who were eligible to be subscribed. We know that a lot of young men who decided to stay now take the jobs that give you the what is called, that insulate you from being subscripted. We don't see much of the posting in social media because there's actually a criminal penalty for calling it a war and not a special operation and criticizing it. You can spend years in jail.
Mm-hmm.
So we can only look at the behavior,
Mm-hmm.
and people are fleeing. People try to secure themselves from it. People go to like different cities to live there so that their office of mobilization would not find them.
Mm-hmm.
So and people on social media are silent because you can get jailed for that.
Right. Okay, so going back to this idea that people was cheating Prigozhin because they think this mutiny could help end the war. My question is, what's the chance that after this that happened, and how?
Well, that is an interesting question. I think that the fighters on the front line would not feel as confident now because after the Prigozhin's mutiny, I think that the commanders of Russian army might think that after Prigozhin's mutiny, having fighters in their units intact and ready to fight is a huge asset. So maybe they would be less willing to throw them to the front line. Interestingly, like Ukrainian counteroffensive progressed pretty much at the same pace during the mutiny and after the mutiny that it did like before that. So as of now, we don't see any huge changes on the front. I suspect that the change would come in Moscow first.
So basically, you think that first the Putin system is gonna collapse somehow, and that's gonna trigger the end of the invasion.
Oh, I think yes, there is like a close parallel between the failed coup against Hitler and half a year after that, the war ended. So I think that this mutiny actually showed Putin's weakness, and Putin only survived on the show of strength for all of these years. And now I don't think people believe that he is that strong.
Okay, let me ask you the last question. Right, I was reading the news this morning, and they report that the Biden administration is now afraid of chaos in Russia, especially if the Kremlin is defeated in Ukraine. Although they will see that positively because it's gonna end this conflict, which obviously the US wants to be ended, but also may trigger democracy in the region. In the short run, they are worried about this chaos. So do you think that it could become very chaotic within Russia if the Kremlin is defeated in Ukraine?
Oh, I think it can become very chaotic in Russia if Kremlin is defeated in Ukrainian war, but if Kremlin stays the same, like while it does it. My guess is that there would be chaos in Kremlin before the end of the war, and then the war would end as a result of that. That said, it can still be pretty chaotic because there's still Wagner. Interestingly, like other Prigozhin assets are being dismantled right now, so like weakening his relative power. But still there is the Ahmad group, which respond to Kadyrov. There are other generals. That said, I think that because the generals could believe that there is a potential of chaos, that's why they would not want their fighters to go and die in Ukraine, because they want to have more alive fighters on their side. Something happens. So yes, there is a possibility of chaos, but I think that there was this possibility of chaos even like at the beginning of the war, because it is not a popular measure, and it is something that can be used to, like Prigozhin said that his mutiny is the start of the civil war. I just hope it will not start a civil war per se, but when Russia is chaotic, it is like very chaotic.
Okay. All right, Natalia, thank you very much for this conversation. Very illuminated, and we stay in touch.
Sure.
Bye.
Bye.